In the early 1990s, doctors across the United States began to change the way they treated pain. For decades, many physicians had been cautious when prescribing strong painkillers. Powerful opioid drugs were usually reserved for cancer patients or those suffering from severe injuries. The fear of addiction was always present. But something started to shift. Medical organizations and pain specialists began arguing that pain was being ignored. Patients, they said, were suffering unnecessarily. Soon, a new idea began spreading through hospitals and medical schools across the country. Pain, they claimed, should be treated as the fifth vital sign, alongside temperature, pulse, breathing, and blood pressure. Doctors were encouraged to measure pain during every patient visit. Hospitals were evaluated on how well they managed it. Patients were even asked to rate their pain on a scale from 0 to 10. The message was clear: pain should never be ignored. Pharmaceutical companies quickly noticed this change. If doctors were going to treat pain more aggressively, the demand for powerful pain medication would grow dramatically. And one company was ready to take advantage of this moment: Purdue Pharma. At the time, Purdue was not yet a household name. The company had existed for decades, but it was relatively small compared to the giants of the pharmaceutical industry. What Purdue did have, however, was ambition and a new drug. In 1996, the company introduced a powerful opioid painkiller called OxyContin. Purdue claimed the drug was revolutionary. Unlike older opioids, OxyContin used a special time-release formula designed to slowly release the medication over 12 hours. Because of this slow release, the company claimed the drug was safer and less addictive than other opioid medications. To many doctors, it sounded like the perfect solution: a powerful painkiller that could provide long-lasting relief while supposedly reducing the risk of addiction. But there was a problem. Behind the marketing promises and the confident sales pitches, few people truly understood how dangerous this drug could become. Within a few years, OxyContin prescriptions would explode across America. What began as a new approach to treating pain would soon evolve into one of the deadliest public health crises in modern history. And this was only the beginning. Behind Purdue Pharma stood one of the wealthiest and most influential families in America, the Sackler family. For decades, the Sacklers had built a powerful reputation in both medicine and business. The family's rise began in the mid-20th century with three brothers, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond Sackler. All three were physicians, but Arthur Sackler in particular had a unique talent that would change the pharmaceutical industry forever. He understood marketing. In the 1950s and 1960s, Arthur Sackler pioneered a revolutionary approach to selling drugs. Instead of marketing directly to patients, pharmaceutical companies would aggressively promote medications to doctors. Sales representatives visited clinics, sponsored medical conferences, funded research, and distributed educational materials that highlighted the benefits of new drugs. It worked. Doctors began prescribing medications more frequently, and pharmaceutical companies saw profits soar. Arthur Sackler's marketing strategies soon became the blueprint for the entire industry. Over time, the Sackler brothers acquired a small pharmaceutical company that would later become Purdue Pharma. Under their leadership, the company began developing pain medications that would eventually dominate the market. But the Sacklers did more than build a business empire. They also built a public image. Across the United States and Europe, the Sackler name appeared on museum wings, university buildings, and prestigious art galleries. Institutions like Harvard, Oxford, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art received millions of dollars in donations. To the public, the Sacklers looked like generous philanthropists, a wealthy family giving back to culture, science, and education. But behind the scenes,
their pharmaceutical empire was preparing for something much bigger. By the early 1990s, Purdue Pharma was searching for its next blockbuster drug. The company needed a product that could dominate the market and generate billions in revenue. When their scientists developed a new extended-release opioid formula, the Sacklers immediately recognized its potential. If marketed correctly, it could transform pain treatment across the country, and it could make Purdue Pharma enormously rich. What the public didn't know was that the company was about to launch one of the most aggressive pharmaceutical marketing campaigns in modern history. A campaign that would send shockwaves through the medical world and ultimately across an entire nation.
In 1996, Purdue Pharma introduced a new drug that would soon change the course of American medicine. Its name was OxyContin. At its core, OxyContin was not entirely new. The active ingredient, oxycodone, had existed for decades and was already known as a powerful opioid painkiller. Drugs in this category were highly effective at relieving severe pain, but they were also known for one serious risk: addiction. Because of this danger, opioids had traditionally been prescribed with caution. Doctors usually reserved them for cancer patients or for short-term use after major surgery or serious injury. But Purdue Pharma believed they had solved this problem. The company claimed that OxyContin used a special extended-release formula. Instead of delivering the full dose immediately, the drug slowly released oxycodone into the body over a 12-hour period. According to Purdue, this slow release would provide long-lasting pain relief while reducing the euphoric high that often led to addiction. In their marketing materials, Purdue representatives repeatedly told doctors that the risk of addiction was extremely low. Some materials even suggested that fewer than 1% of patients would become addicted. To many physicians, this sounded like a breakthrough. A strong opioid that could safely treat chronic pain conditions such as back injuries, arthritis, and nerve damage. Millions of patients suffering from long-term pain suddenly had access to a drug that promised relief without the usual risks. Doctors across the country began prescribing it. At first, OxyContin seemed like a miracle drug. Patients reported powerful pain relief. Many could return to work, move more comfortably, and regain parts of their daily lives that pain had taken away. But as prescriptions increased, something else began to happen. Some patients discovered that if the pill was crushed instead of swallowed whole, the extended release system would break. The entire dose of oxycodone would enter the body at once. The effect was intense, a powerful opioid high, similar to heroin. Word began spreading quickly, not just among patients, but among people looking for a new way to get high. Within a few years, OxyContin would gain a new nickname on the streets: hillbilly heroin. What Purdue Pharma had presented as a safer opioid was quietly becoming something far more dangerous, and the explosion of prescriptions had only just begun. By the late 1990s, Purdue Pharma was determined to make OxyContin one of the most widely prescribed painkillers in America. To do that, the company launched a marketing campaign unlike anything the pharmaceutical industry had seen before. Purdue dramatically expanded its sales force, sending hundreds of representatives across the country. Their mission was simple: convince doctors that OxyContin was safe, effective, and appropriate for treating many types of pain. Sales representatives visited clinics, hospitals, and private practices every day. They carried brochures, research summaries, and promotional materials designed to reassure physicians about the drug's safety. One message appeared again and again. The risk of addiction, Purdue claimed, was very low. To reinforce this message, the company organized thousands of educational seminars for doctors.
Many of these events were held at luxury hotels and conference centers. Physicians were invited to attend lectures about pain management, often accompanied by free meals, travel accommodations, and professional networking opportunities. The events looked like medical education, but they were also marketing. Doctors who attended were encouraged to view chronic pain as a widespread and undertreated medical problem. OxyContin, Purdue suggested, could be the solution. At the same time, Purdue introduced financial incentives for its sales representatives. The more prescriptions doctors wrote, the larger the bonuses those representatives could receive. The strategy worked. Sales representatives aggressively promoted the drug, and prescriptions began rising rapidly. Doctors who had once been cautious about opioids started prescribing OxyContin for back pain, sports injuries, dental procedures, and many other conditions. Within just a few years, prescriptions for the drug skyrocketed. By the early 2000s, OxyContin was generating billions of dollars in revenue. Purdue Pharma had successfully transformed a powerful opioid into a mainstream pain treatment. But while the company celebrated its success, troubling reports were beginning to emerge. Across several regions of the United States, doctors and law enforcement officers started noticing a disturbing pattern. Patients were becoming dependent on OxyContin. Some were taking far higher doses than prescribed. Others were crushing the pills to bypass the time-release system. Emergency rooms began seeing more overdose cases linked to the drug. In small towns and rural communities, addiction was spreading faster than anyone expected. What Purdue Pharma had built was more than a marketing success. It was the beginning of a nationwide wave of dependency, and the consequences were only starting to appear.
As OxyContin prescriptions continued to rise across the United States, a troubling pattern began to emerge. At first, the warning signs were subtle. Doctors in certain regions started noticing patients returning earlier than expected for refills. Some patients claimed their medication had been lost or stolen. Others insisted their pain had suddenly become worse and asked for higher doses. What many physicians didn't realize at the time was that some of their patients had already developed a powerful dependency on the drug. OxyContin contained oxycodone, one of the strongest opioid painkillers available. When taken regularly, the body could quickly develop tolerance. That meant patients needed larger and larger doses to achieve the same level of pain relief. Soon, some patients were taking far more than originally prescribed. Others discovered something that made the drug even more dangerous. If the pill was crushed, the time-release coating would break. Instead of slowly releasing the drug over 12 hours, the entire dose would hit the bloodstream almost instantly. The result was a powerful opioid high. For some users, the experience was intensely addictive. Word spread quickly, not through medical journals, but through communities, friends, and street dealers. People learned that OxyContin could be crushed, snorted, or even dissolved and injected. What had been marketed as a controlled, long-acting medication was now being used like an illegal narcotic. In several rural areas, especially in parts of Appalachia, addiction rates began rising rapidly. Emergency rooms reported increasing cases of overdoses. Law enforcement officers began encountering the drug in illegal markets. Some communities were hit particularly hard. In small towns where economic hardship was already common, OxyContin quickly became both a dependency and a commodity. Pills were sold, traded, and stolen. Pharmacies were robbed. Families watched as loved ones struggled with addiction.
Doctors also began to question what was happening. Some physicians who had trusted Purdue's claims about low addiction risk started realizing that many of their patients were becoming dependent on the drug. Yet, by this point, OxyContin had already spread across the country. Prescriptions numbered in the millions, and for many patients, stopping the drug was no longer simple. The opioid epidemic was beginning to take shape, but the scale of the crisis was still far from fully understood. By the early 2000s, the consequences of widespread OxyContin use were becoming impossible to ignore. In many parts of the United States, entire communities were beginning to feel the impact. Small towns were often the hardest hit. Places that had once been quiet and stable suddenly faced a growing wave of addiction. In regions like Appalachia, where industries such as coal mining had already declined, economic hardship made communities especially vulnerable. OxyContin spread quickly through these areas. At first, the drug often entered through legitimate prescriptions. A patient injured at work might receive the medication for pain. But over time, the pills began circulating far beyond the original patient. Family members, friends, and neighbors sometimes gained access to the medication. Pills were sold, traded, or stolen. In some towns, OxyContin became one of the most valuable items on the local black market. The price of a single pill could reach tens or even hundreds of dollars. As addiction grew, so did its consequences. Emergency rooms saw a sharp rise in overdoses. Local police departments reported increased drug-related crimes. Pharmacies were robbed. Doctors' offices were targeted by people desperate to obtain prescriptions. Families were often caught in the middle of the crisis. Parents watched their children struggle with addiction. Children lost parents to overdoses. Entire households were torn apart by dependency, financial hardship, and grief. For many communities, the opioid crisis became a daily reality. Some local officials began sounding the alarm. Doctors, law enforcement officers, and public health experts warned that something far larger than a typical drug problem was unfolding. But the crisis was spreading faster than anyone could respond. By this point, millions of OxyContin prescriptions had already been written across the country. And as addiction tightened its grip on thousands of lives, another troubling truth was becoming clear. For many people who could no longer obtain prescription opioids, there was another drug waiting in the shadows: heroin. What had begun as a medical solution for pain was now fueling a growing epidemic, one that would soon evolve into one of the deadliest drug crises in modern American history.
As the opioid crisis deepened, a growing number of people began asking a difficult question: how had this happened? Doctors were seeing addiction spread among their patients. Communities were overwhelmed by overdoses. Law enforcement was dealing with an expanding black market for prescription pills. Some medical professionals began to suspect that the problem might not just be the drug itself. It might also be the way it had been marketed. A few doctors started speaking publicly about their concerns. They reported seeing patients who had become dependent on OxyContin even when they had followed their prescriptions carefully. Others noticed that the number of opioid prescriptions being written had increased dramatically in a very short period of time. Meanwhile, researchers began studying the drug more closely. Some studies suggested that the risk of addiction was far higher than Purdue Pharma had originally claimed. Critics questioned the company's repeated statement that addiction was rare. The doubts began to attract the attention of investigators. Journalists started digging into Purdue's marketing strategies. They interviewed doctors, patients, and former employees of the company. What they discovered raised serious questions about how OxyContin had been promoted. According to several reports, Purdue's sales representatives had been trained to reassure doctors that the drug had a low risk of addiction.
Internal company documents would later suggest that Purdue was aware of increasing abuse and misuse of the drug in certain regions. Yet the company's marketing campaign continued. At the same time, a small number of insiders began to speak out. Whistleblowers, including former employees and medical professionals, claimed that the company had minimized the risks associated with OxyContin while aggressively pushing doctors to prescribe it. Their testimonies attracted the attention of prosecutors. Soon, state and federal investigators began examining Purdue Pharma more closely. They wanted to understand what the company knew about the risks of its drug and when it knew it. The investigation would eventually expose internal communications, sales strategies, and marketing decisions that had remained hidden from the public for years. And what those documents revealed would spark one of the largest legal battles the pharmaceutical industry had ever seen.
By the mid-2000s, the opioid crisis was no longer a quiet problem unfolding in small towns. It had become a national emergency. Hospitals across the United States were treating growing numbers of opioid overdoses. Addiction treatment centers were overwhelmed. Families across the country were losing loved ones to drugs that had originally been prescribed by doctors. As public awareness grew, anger began to rise. Many people started asking who should be held responsible for the crisis. Soon, the legal battles began. State governments, local communities, and individual victims started filing lawsuits against Purdue Pharma. They accused the company of misleading doctors and the public about the risks of OxyContin. According to these lawsuits, Purdue had aggressively marketed the drug while downplaying its addictive potential. Prosecutors began gathering evidence. Investigators reviewed internal company emails, sales training materials, and marketing strategies used by Purdue's sales teams. The documents revealed how strongly the company had pushed OxyContin as a safe solution for chronic pain. In 2007, the first major legal breakthrough arrived. Purdue Pharma and 3 of its top executives agreed to plead guilty to federal criminal charges related to the misbranding of OxyContin. The company admitted that it had misled doctors about the drug's risk of addiction. As part of the settlement, Purdue agreed to pay over $600 million in fines and penalties. At the time, it was one of the largest pharmaceutical settlements in U.S. history. But for many critics, the punishment felt too small. OxyContin had generated billions of dollars in revenue. Meanwhile, addiction continued to spread across the country. Over the following years, the number of lawsuits grew rapidly. Cities, counties, Native American tribes, and entire states joined the legal fight. They argued that the opioid epidemic had forced them to spend enormous amounts of money on healthcare, law enforcement, and addiction treatment. The courtroom battles would continue for more than a decade, and eventually they would threaten the very survival of Purdue Pharma itself. But even as the legal pressure increased, the opioid crisis continued evolving in a far more dangerous direction. Because for many people already addicted to prescription opioids, a new and even deadlier drug was beginning to dominate the streets. By the late 2010s, Purdue Pharma was facing a storm it could no longer escape. For years, lawsuits had been piling up across the United States. Cities, counties, states, and tribal governments all claimed that the company's actions had played a major role in fueling the opioid epidemic. The number of legal cases eventually grew into the thousands. Each lawsuit carried the same core accusation. Purdue Pharma had aggressively marketed OxyContin while minimizing the risks of addiction, contributing to a nationwide public health disaster. As the evidence mounted, pressure on the company intensified. Investigators and journalists uncovered internal documents
that revealed how Purdue had tracked opioid abuse reports in certain regions while continuing to push for higher prescription numbers. Critics argued that the company had prioritized profit while communities across the country were suffering. The lawsuits also began to focus attention on the Sackler family. Although Purdue Pharma was privately owned by members of the Sackler family, the family itself had largely stayed out of public view. But as the opioid crisis worsened, activists, lawmakers, and victims' families began demanding accountability. Protests erupted outside museums and universities that carried the Sackler name. Some institutions began removing the family's name from buildings and galleries after years of donations. Public pressure was growing rapidly. Then, in 2019, Purdue Pharma made a dramatic announcement. The company filed for bankruptcy protection. The decision was part of a plan to settle thousands of lawsuits while restructuring the company. Under the proposed settlement, Purdue would transform into a new entity whose profits would be used to fund opioid addiction treatment and prevention programs. The agreement also required the Sackler family to contribute billions of dollars toward addressing the crisis. But the plan quickly became controversial. Many victims and state officials argued that the settlement allowed the Sackler family to avoid full responsibility. Some critics believed the financial penalties were far too small compared to the scale of the damage caused by the epidemic. Legal battles over the settlement would continue for years. But one thing was already clear. The pharmaceutical empire built around OxyContin had collapsed under the weight of the opioid crisis. Yet the crisis itself was far from over. In fact, it was about to enter an even more dangerous phase.
Even as Purdue Pharma collapsed under legal pressure, the opioid crisis did not disappear. In many ways, it became even worse. By the late 2010s and early 2020s, the nature of the epidemic had changed. Prescription opioids like OxyContin had started the crisis, but many people who developed dependencies had already moved on to other drugs. When prescription pills became harder to obtain, many users turned to heroin. But an even more dangerous substance soon began dominating the illegal drug market: fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that can be dozens of times more powerful than heroin. Originally developed for medical use in severe pain management, it began appearing in illegal drug supplies around the world. Unlike prescription opioids, illicit fentanyl was often manufactured in unregulated labs and mixed into street drugs without users knowing. This made it extremely deadly. A dose only slightly too large could cause a fatal overdose within minutes. As fentanyl spread through drug markets, overdose deaths began rising at an alarming rate. Communities that had already struggled with prescription opioid addiction now faced a wave of deaths far greater than before. The crisis that had begun with prescription painkillers had evolved into something far more complex. Today, the opioid epidemic has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives in the United States. Families across the country continue to cope with loss, addiction, and the long-term consequences of the crisis. The story of Purdue Pharma and OxyContin remains one of the most controversial chapters in the history of modern medicine. It is a story about powerful drugs, aggressive marketing, corporate responsibility, and the fragile balance between treating pain and preventing harm. But it is also a story about people. Patients searching for relief from suffering, doctors trying to help their patients, families struggling to understand how addiction took hold of their loved ones, and communities still working to rebuild after years of devastation. The opioid epidemic did not begin overnight, and it will not end quickly.
Yet the lessons from this crisis continued to shape how medicine, government, and society confront the risks of powerful drugs. Because the story of the opioid empire is not just history, it is a warning about what can happen when medicine, profit, and human vulnerability collide.